Stella's Star, narrated by Susan McGurl. Chapter 1. The rapid wipers squeaked against the windshield as Stella struggled to see the road. Snow fell from the sky, giving the appearance she was encased inside a snow globe on a dark night. She tensed, remaining ramrod straight and too focused to blink as she navigated the storm. With good weather, she was 15 minutes from her parents' house, but in this mess, it might take her 30. The small puppy in the cushioned crate beside her whined softly. "I know, Bandit. It's ugly out there." One of the front wheels jolted, striking the edge of the road, or perhaps a pothole. The car started to slide on a slick patch of ice, but she kept the wheels straight without panicking, and the tires reconnected with the asphalt. She accelerated slowly, hoping to make it safely home. Suddenly, a red pickup truck came toward her, driving down the middle of the highway. When she swerved to avoid a head-on collision, her car spun on an icy patch. Life advanced in slow motion as her vehicle plummeted off the side of the road towards a tree. Every muscle in her body tensed. She braced for impact and heard the crunch of metal as the airbag smacked her in the face. Slightly dazed, she watched the headlights of her Subaru illuminate an enormous tree trunk. With a slightly tremulous grip on the wheel, she tried to restart the car. Nothing happened when she pushed the start button. Not that she could drive her Impreza up the side of the hill through the snowdrift anyway. Beside Stella, Bandit whined. "You need the bathroom, little guy? Okay, you pee and I'll phone for help." She took him out of his car tote, thankful he'd been strapped in securely and was unharmed. Pulling on her hat and gloves, she braved the cold. After he turned a patch of ice yellow, she picked him back up and tucked him into her coat for protection. Grimacing, she inspected the caved-in front of her blue car. Yep, the only way it was moving now was with a tow truck. She pulled out her phone. No signal. She held it high as she walked in a circle around the car, a futile gesture she knew. She wondered if the storm was interfering with a tower or repeater. "Come on, give me a signal," she willed, to no avail. Frigid air blew around her as snow continued to pour from the sky. Taking in the surrounding darkness, she saw no lights in the distance. She knew cabins were sprinkled around the mountainside, but she could walk a mile and not find one if she went in the wrong direction. She could stay in her car, but it wasn't likely to be spotted from the road. What she wouldn't do was panic. She'd been trained for harsh conditions and knew survival techniques. She tapped her phone as she stared at the lack of service bars. She walked several steps in search of a mobile signal. This was certainly not how she'd intended to spend Christmas Eve. She'd hoped after last year's not-so-merry and bright holiday, this one would be better. That didn't seem to be the case. When her boot hit a slick stone jutting up from the snow, she pitched forward, and her phone flew from her hand. She curled her arms around Bandit, still under her coat, to protect him as she tumbled down the embankment. 12 hours earlier. Warner moved the mouse cursor along the computer screen as he tweaked his Introduction to Solar Systems PowerPoint-based lecture. 42 slides. At 1 minute per slide for the presentation, he would leave 18 minutes of class time for questions. Except students typically liked to end 5 minutes early, which meant he had left 13 minutes for questions. However, if he added a few slides and shortened it to 9.5 minutes, he could make the point that they had as many minutes for questions as Saturn was from the sun in astronomical units. When he finished, he opened a browser window about local news. A front was moving in, bringing colder weather and snow, perfect for playing outside on Christmas Day. He skimmed through politics and celebrity news until an article caught his attention. Jailbreak. 6 hours ago, Willie and Alvin Green broke out of the Virginian Corrections Department. Police have cast a wide net to search for the escaped convicts. The brothers were last seen in a red Chevy Colorado heading west. A picture separating the text showed two large and unfriendly faces glaring at the camera. They wore orange jumpsuits and looked as different as two brothers could, one tall and thick, the other short and thin. The brothers were convicted of armed robbery and had served 3 of their 8-year sentence. Police cautioned that they're armed and dangerous. Can authorities catch the criminals, or will the Grinch brothers ruin Christmas? Daddy, no working on Christmas Eve. Warner shut the laptop before Lizzie could see the screen and scrubbed a hand along his face. You're right, sweetie. I'm sorry. What else could he say? He had work and he had Lizzie. If she was busy with her dolls or sleeping in the early morning hours, all he knew to do was work. Come here, you. He helped her into his lap as he sat in a nook in the living room of the cabin he'd rented. Her golden curls tickled his nose as she leaned back. He couldn't think of a more perfect moment. His 6-year-old daughter curled against him as they looked at the winter wonderland outside the window with the sun rising over the horizon. In one of the bedrooms, his parents began stirring. Soon they'd be up and making breakfast for the family. He basked in the serene moment with Lizzie. He could get used to enjoying a view like this as he worked, though he might catch himself daydreaming more. After the expected snow tonight, their location and the weather would make the perfect holiday. Tomorrow they would spend Christmas morning playing in the soft white powder right outside their front door. He needed to enjoy the vacation and maximize their quality time together. Lizzie turned and looked up at him. Do you want to have a tea party for breakfast? He chuckled. She wasn't capable of sitting still for more than a minute and enjoying a beautiful moment, but that was okay. He would relish whatever little tender morsels he could. I'd love a tea party. He tickled her as they stood. Stella held her plank pose as she gazed out the window at the snow-covered ground. A picturesque scene on Christmas Eve with more snow to come later tonight. Out here in the hills of remote Virginia, everything was quiet and tranquil. This was exactly what she'd needed to soothe her soul. When the oven buzzed, indicating it had reached her desired temperature, she counted out her last 5 push-ups and stood, adjusting her long sweater over her yoga pants. A ball of fur tumbled across her bare feet. Hello, Bandit. She scooped up the puppy and nuzzled her nose in the soft fur of her newest best friend. The mixed-breed husky and Australian shepherd squirmed playfully. You need to go outside, don't you? She slipped the sheet of a dozen cookies into the oven before tugging on her winter coat and wool-lined boots to brave the cold. The fresh mountain air was crisp and raised her holiday spirit. The slick walkway presented a hazard as she carried Bandit, but she gingerly made her way to a small clearing of wilted grass she'd shoveled clear earlier. She set down the puppy, who took care of business. Back inside, she took off her boots and coat and washed her hands. Bandit chewed a rope, and warmth flooded her at the smell of baking cookies. A low-key Christmas with just her and man's best friend would be sheer bliss. When her mobile phone cut through the silence, she put the call on speakerphone. Hi, Mom. Your house is fine, still in one piece. I was calling to check on you. I'm great. I always love this place in the winter. It's the perfect Christmas location, and I can't believe you aren't staying here over the holidays to enjoy it. Stella also couldn't believe her parents hadn't even put up a Christmas tree this year. When she arrived 3 days ago to take on the role of house sitting, she'd commented on the lack of decorations. Her mother had explained that since they were traveling to the Caribbean, putting up a tree only to take it back down when they came home seemed like a waste of time. Sweetheart, we're in a tropical paradise with 80-degree weather. Next year, we'll have a nice get together at the house. Is that mutt of yours behaving himself? I promise I'm keeping a close eye on him. When you get back, you won't find a single carpet stain or chewed shoe. Little Bandit had an array of toys to cut his teeth on, and Stella had been letting him out regularly to house train him. Oh, I wish you had found a man instead of a dog. Her mother gave a wistful sigh. Yeah, well, dogs don't cheat and lie. There are a lot of good men out there, and I'm convinced they're all taken. But that's okay. I'm going to have a beautiful white Christmas in the company of my new best friend. Stella had convinced herself that she cheerfully anticipated Christmas alone. Isolation would be cleansing after the heart-wrenching events of last Christmas. She could have a drama-free holiday and think of all the ways the new year would be a new beginning. She hadn't bothered to date over the last year due to a combination of her past experience shattering her trust in men and lack of opportunity as a result of her job travel schedule. Okay, well, don't forget to scrape the driveway. There's another snowstorm coming, and it gets absolutely unmanageable if it's not cleaned daily. I've got your entire to-do list here, and don't worry about calling and checking on me. I'm going to have a pleasant Christmas. You enjoy yours. Stella had plans to do some endurance training while in the mountains, and she'd brought her rifle for target practice. Call me when your plane lands at Richmond to let me know you made it back safe. Merry Christmas, Stella. Merry Christmas, Mom. Stella set down her phone and walked through her parents' house to the utility drawer in the kitchen. She thought putting up a few Christmas decorations would solidify her holiday spirit, but she couldn't remember where her mom kept the attic key and had forgotten to ask before they'd hung up. She rummaged through the kitchen drawer with scissors, pens, paper clips, screwdrivers, a stapler, rubber bands, and other odds and ends. She didn't find a key. She then walked to her parents' bedroom and opened the door. Perhaps there was a place in here where the key was stored. Her gaze fell on her mother's jewelry box on the dresser. She'd always adored the polished mahogany wood with intricate carvings. Fun memories of trying on her mother's jewelry as a child danced in her mind. She would wear one of her mom's silk shirts as a dress, slip on a pair of high heels much too big for her, and then don necklaces and rings. Her mom would laugh and photograph her all decked out. As an adult, though, Stella didn't have a lifestyle with any need for nice clothing and expensive jewelry. She ran her hand over the smooth surface of the jewelry box and lifted it open, admiring the sparkling silver and gold. The contents of the box were like Christmas themselves. Then she saw her mom's engagement ring, and the large, opulent piece of jewelry winked at her. Stella knew her mom had left it at home so as to not risk losing it on her Caribbean dream vacation. Stella's own engagement ring had been simpler, though all of the details were difficult to recall since she'd worn the cursed thing less than 24 hours before throwing it back in Chuck's face. She picked up her mother's ring and slipped it on. The fit was a little snug. It would certainly look odd wearing a diamond on her left hand while holding an M18 SIG in her right. She turned her wrists left and right, admiring the way the sun through the bedroom window made the diamond dazzle. But love wasn't an expensive ring. The fickle emotion contained nothing so solid and pure. Maybe that's why diamonds were a girl's best friend. Jewelry couldn't betray you. She would have taken true love over a diamond ring any day. Foolish dreams. She tugged at her mother's ring to remove it, intending to put it back, but it didn't budge. Uh-oh. Nothing a little soap wouldn't fix. Her phone alarm went off, indicating the cookies were finished baking. When she returned to the kitchen, the aroma of cinnamon filled the air as Stella pulled the snickerdoodle cookies out of the oven. They were a perfect golden brown. Oh, but the ensemble is only perfect when coupled with eggnog. She checked the refrigerator. Shoot, no nog. Out the window, a clear sky spread above the trees. More snow was expected later today, but she should be able to travel to the store and back before the precipitation started. It was now or never, since none of the local stores would be open Christmas Day. She turned off the oven, bundled up, and stepped outside with Bandit. As she set to work shoveling the short driveway, the puppy played in the snow, jumping, spinning, and snapping at the cold white piles. Manual labor. This was excellent, and it did wonders to distract her from dwelling on last year's debacle. A cracking and snapping of plastic brought her attention back to the present. The snow shovel had fractured at the handle, rendering it useless. Add snow shovel to the list. She set it aside. Apparently, I don't know my own strength. Fortunately, she had cleared most of the drive, enough to make it to the road. Next, she layered down the salt in case the snow fell before she returned. Quick trip. Eggnog, shovel, and now rock salt. To be thorough, she went back through the fridge and pantry and made a list. Next, she secured Bandit in the passenger seat beside her in a cushioned crate lashed to the seat by the seatbelt. His tongue lolled out, happy as a lark to be in the car. Maybe she should get dog biscuits too. In the car, her phone rang, and she put the call on speaker. "Stella!" her brother bellowed. She rolled her eyes even as she smiled to herself. Yeah, because that never gets old. Hello, Mark. She doubted he'd even seen a streetcar named Desire. She pulled out of the drive and onto the road, intending to go to the hardware store first. "How are you?" he asked. Apparently, her entire family was checking up on her before Christmas, probably because they'd had to deal with her morose mood for the first 6 months of the year following last Christmas's sorrow. But a few hours every day at the gun range and judo sparring had mostly cleared her mind of the devastation. "All tucked in at Mom's place," she said. "I'll have a cozy Christmas with my new dog and snickerdoodle cookies." "And eggnog?" "You know it." "I wish you'd have come to our family Christmas," Mark said. "I'm ready for some me time." She also didn't want the inevitable looks of sympathy from extended family that she was still single after a breakup a year ago, or, heaven forbid, the dreaded, "He wasn't good enough for you anyway." While the statement was true, the words offered no real consolation when she considered how long they'd been together, only to have the sudden realization that the relationship had all been a terrible waste of time and emotion. "Uh-huh. You sure you're not up to some secret spy mission?" "I'd tell you, but then I'd have to, you know." Mark laughed. Yeah. Okay, enjoy your supposed Christmas alone. You know, with all your connections, you could have made Chuck's life miserable, made him suffer." "He doesn't get to have me. That's his punishment." "Then he's definitely missing out." Stella chuckled. "Merry Christmas," her brother said. Back at ya. He disconnected the call, and she knew the next time they'd talk would be to exchange Happy New Year greetings. Mark always excelled at lifting her spirits, and somehow he saw through her false bravado, knew when she was hurting, and knew just what to say without making her admit weakness. In truth, she blamed herself for what happened as much as Chuck. They'd been dating 5 years when she had finally stopped dropping hints and told him she wanted a commitment. A month later, he'd tossed a box to her from across the room with a hearty, "Your wish has been granted." The cavalier proposal was hardly the delivery she'd expected. It was devoid of magic, but she'd told herself she asked for the commitment, not the romance. If she'd wanted romance, perhaps she should have specified that as well. The next day, on a surprise visit to his apartment, she'd found him in bed with a scantily clad Miss Claus asking him how naughty he planned to be. Stella generally considered her character one of cool under pressure. All the same, it was probably best she hadn't been wearing her sidearm at the time. She blamed herself for ignoring warning signs and nudging Chuck in a direction he wasn't ready to go. Yet she'd invested 5 years in their relationship. 5 long years. At least she'd learned the truth before she wore more than an engagement ring. The hardware store visit was uneventful. In and out with a shiny new shovel and a 5-pound bag of driveway salt. And she even found a sprig of real mistletoe for sale. She bought it, not because she nurtured any delusions she would put it to good use, but because her parents would enjoy the sight of it when they arrived home from vacation. She even knew where she'd put it, under the little decorative arch in the foyer. The first grocery store she reached had an empty parking lot. The sign on the door read "Closed for inclement weather." She looked up at the darkening sky. Only one more store. If it was closed, she would tuck her tail and go home without eggnog. A few miles down the road, the first white flakes began their descent. But that wasn't a problem. Temperatures weren't freezing yet. Maybe the precipitation would hit the road and melt. Melt and then freeze into ice on the surface by sunset? No worries. She would be home before that happened. Chapter 2. What if Santa doesn't find us because we're not at home? Oh, don't worry about that. He'll find us. Warner stroked a hand through his daughter's soft curls as he tucked her in for the night. They'd had a fun day of tea parties, snuggling with stuffed animals, and reading books. You remember the story of the Christmas star I told you? The 3 wise men couldn't have followed a normal star to baby Jesus because no star matches the time and place of his birth. He nodded. That's right. It can't be explained by science, and yet a guiding light took them where they needed to go. So you see, Christmas is a time for miracles, and Santa will find us. He knew that scientists speculated the star phenomenon had been 3 planets perfectly aligned, or perhaps a comet, but the theories hadn't been proven to the satisfaction of scholars, and so added to the magic of the story. Then why can't I have the present I want? Lizzie asked, her tone infused with a longing whine. Warner sighed, his heart breaking a little. Because Santa doesn't deliver people for Christmas, only objects. Not even new moms? He pulled the covers tighter around her. They had already had this discussion 2 weeks ago when he'd read over her letter to Santa and had been flabbergasted to read her first request, a new mother. The second thing she wanted was a puppy. 3 years had passed since Lizzie's mother had died, and Warner hadn't started dating regularly yet. Work and being a single parent kept him plenty occupied. Dating would devour evening time he valued with Lizzie. In addition, the idea of slugging through dozens of dates to find someone to begin to forge the foundation of a relationship sounded daunting. And how many failed relationships would he have to endure to find the right woman who would love both of them? Not even new moms, he said definitively. The puppy, then? Puppies only go to homes with people who have time to care for them, sweetie. He had certainly not bought her a puppy for Christmas. A pet would have been another undertaking which would require entirely too much time and patience for a full-time working man and single father. A knock came at the door. Gran! Lizzie smiled. I'm just coming to say goodnight, dear. Tomorrow's the big day. Warner's mother entered and gave Lizzie a kiss on the forehead. Warner watched the tender moment, happy his parents were able to join them on this holiday vacation. Sharing Christmas morning with them would make it all the more magical. When his mother left, Lizzie asked, Will you sing We Three Kings? Of course. He relaxed against the headboard as Lizzie cuddled into her blankets. Then, taking a breath, he softly began singing John Henry Hopkins' 1857 Christmas Carol. We three kings of Orient are, bearing gifts we traverse afar. Field and fountain, moor and mountain, following yonder star. Oh, star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to thy perfect light. When he finished the song, he kissed her forehead softly and bid her good night. He would probably wait until around 10 o'clock to set out the array of wrapped presents from Santa. Maybe some of them would be good enough to make his daughter forget her fanciful notion of having Santa bring her a mother. She woke to a throbbing headache. Shivering violently, she struggled to focus on her surroundings. Bare trees towered over her, stretching up from a blanket of snow. All was shrouded in darkness, with a sliver of moon intermittently visible behind briskly moving heavy clouds. When she sat up, her jacket moved, and a small head protruded. Well, hey there, cutie, she began, but she couldn't recall the puppy's name, or if it even belonged to her. Keeping the animal snuggled securely in her jacket, she pushed to her feet. She needed to get moving to avoid freezing to death. But where was she? Even more alarming, who was she? Survival meant she couldn't dwell on what she didn't know or the throbbing pain at the back of her head. She needed shelter, and everything else was secondary to that. She patted her pockets. No phone. No flashlight. She pushed aside a feeling of despair and forced her legs forward through the snow. Stay warm. Move. She wasn't going to give up and die in the wilderness. And if anything happened to her, this small animal, clearly under her care, wouldn't last long. A twinkling in the distant sky caught her attention. Was it a star? It looked too low in the sky to be a star, but it wasn't moving like a plane. In fact, it was in front of the clouds, not behind them. Inexplicably, she felt drawn to the light, and walked toward it. The longer she stared, the more she realized the star blinked rather than twinkled. The series of blinks were specific and repeated over and over. The light was communicating. Warner stood near the living room sofa, coffee cup in hand, and stared down at the woman sleeping on the couch. He couldn't fathom how she'd entered the cabin. Christmas morning sunlight streamed through one window, casting a glow on the woman's peaceful, slumbering face. She was bundled in a winter coat, with her hands tucked in her pockets. He'd first noticed her when he passed through the living room on the way to the kitchen to make coffee. Since she'd been sleeping and didn't look particularly dangerous with her pink cap and puffy coat, he had proceeded to brew a pot, then check all the windows and doors. Nothing appeared unlocked or displaced. The main door of the rental property was key code access only, so he wondered if there had been some mix-up with the rental office and this woman had thought she'd also rented the cabin. That logic was hard to justify since dual rentership didn't explain why she'd shown up in the middle of the night with no luggage and no visible vehicle outside. Warner's mother and father filled their cups of coffee and joined him as all three of them stared at the sleeping beauty.
"Darndest thing,"
his father Ralph said. "If she was walking in that storm last night, it's a wonder she didn't freeze to death," said Louise, his mother. Warner sipped his coffee.
"I'm sure she'll have a logical explanation when she decides to wake up and enlighten us." "You don't suppose she's in some type of unconscious state, more than just sleeping?"
Ralph asked. The intruder's coloring looked healthy, and her chest rose and fell with normal breathing. The mountain roads were impassable to vehicles after the storm. If she was injured, no aid could travel to or from the cabin until the snow cleared, so medical evaluation and care would have to wait. Before Warner could answer his father, Lizzie came bounding down the stairs. She gasped when she saw the woman on the sofa. "Santa delivered a new mom!" Warner blanched as his parents turned to gape at him. He cleared his throat.
"No, honey,"
he began, addressing Lizzie. But the woman stirred, and all eyes turned toward her. She started to sit up, but froze when she noticed the room full of people. "Where am I?" she asked, wide-eyed. "Don't look so frightened," Louise said. Her head full of gray curls probably looked the least threatening next to Warner's flannel pajamas and the stuffed unicorn in Lizzie's grasp. "You maybe entered the wrong rental cabin. I'm sure it happens. I'm Louise, and this is my husband Ralph and our son Warner. That's our granddaughter Lizzie." A yipping sound emitted from the woman as her coat moved. She startled before unzipping her coat to reveal a small, fluffy puppy. "And Santa brought a puppy!" Lizzie declared. Warner stared at the pair of them, speechless. The woman sat up, holding the puppy in her hands. He appeared to be part husky. "Oh, would you look at him? He must be starving." His mother lifted the puppy from the woman's hands and inspected him. "Who are you, Mr. Adorable?" She read his collar. "Bandit? Oh my! That's rather ferocious, isn't it? Hardly befitting such a cute thing as yourself." The dog licked her fingers enthusiastically as she petted him. Ralph adjusted the coffee cup in his hand.
"Why don't you tell us who you are, young lady? How can we get you where you belong? It's Christmas morning. Someone must be very worried about you."
"Christmas?" The woman gasped as she reached around and gently touched the back of her head. I I don't know who I am. I don't know how I got here. She tugged off her cap, revealing a head of dark, glossy hair.
Perhaps you have some identification,
Warner said. He hated to see her so distraught. When she looked up at Warner through dark lashes, his heart fluttered a few beats. He noticed an engagement ring on her finger as she fidgeted with her coat. Of course, she was married. She was youthful and pretty, probably late 20s if he had to guess. She stood up slowly, a little unbalanced, and unzipped her winter coat. She rummaged through multiple pockets in her coat and blue jeans, but produced only a tube of chapstick and a matchbook. I'm sorry. I'm at a complete loss here, and I seem to have crashed your Christmas morning. Don't be sad. Lizzie stepped up and took her hand, staring up at her with big eyes. Santa brought you. Maybe you're too new from the factory to have a memory. The woman smiled warmly at Lizzie. That's very sweet of you. Warner set down his coffee cup and scooped Lizzie into his arms.
I'm sure Jane Doe didn't drop down the chimney, honey, but we'll sort it out.
Finding a beautiful woman in his living room on Christmas morning might have felt like a Christmas present if she hadn't also been sporting a 2-carat diamond ring. Whomever she was attached to was probably losing his mind right about now. Jane? Lizzie wrinkled her nose. I don't think she looks like a Jane. We should give her a better name. Daddy, what's the name of your favorite galaxy?
Andromeda.
Yes, let's color that. The woman had beautiful eyes that he could just as easily stargaze into. All the more reason to not name her anything related to objects of his affection. He didn't know this woman and needed to keep his distance.
Honey, when people don't remember their name, we call them Jane or John. It's very standard. You keep rubbing your head. Are you okay?
Ralph asked the woman. What about Star? Lizzie suggested. She's like our Christmas star. I've got a tender lump back there. I'm guessing I hit something, and that's why I can't remember who I am.
If it's okay with her,
Warner acquiesced to his daughter. Can we call you Star? Lizzie asked her. Okay. That's a very nice name. Well, don't fret about the memories, honey, Louise said as she ushered the woman into the kitchen. You'll feel better with a strong cup of coffee and some food. While we're at it, we'll feed this little guy. I can help feed him. Lizzie squirmed out of Warner's grasp and darted into her grandmother. Star, can I feed your dog? Yes, thank you. While the pair of them took care of the dog, Ralph worked at pulling eggs and bacon out of the refrigerator, and Warner walked over to the coffee machine. Star. He liked the name a little too much, and it only added to the mysteriousness of her arrival. Perhaps with some caffeine and nutrition, her memory would return to her, and she would be able to go back to where she belonged. Chapter 3. Star inhaled the scent of coffee. Star. The name didn't sound quite correct, but Star seemed better than no name at all.
how do you like your coffee?
She stared at Warner with his disheveled, dirty blonde hair, bit of stubble, and incredibly warm eyes. Whenever she felt a rising panic at the thought of her amnesia, one look into those eyes grounded her. How do you like your coffee? It seemed like such an innocuous question, something you were asked at a restaurant by a complete stranger. But standing beside a man wearing pajamas in his kitchen, The offer felt personal and intimate. The room grew warm. She needed to take her jacket off, except she realized she already had.
Star?
Black. Maybe he would think her delayed response was amnesia related and not because she was thinking about what lay beneath the red and green flannel he wore. He poured the beverage and offered it to her. She accepted with both hands, grazing his hand with hers. A zing spread through her. When she looked up, Warner was close and looking down at her. His gaze skimmed from her eyes to her lips and down to the mug she held. They settled on her left hand a beat before he blinked and took a step back. She looked at the hand. Right. Engagement ring. She was engaged. She tried to grasp this bit of information to see if it would trigger other memories, but the only sensation rising to the surface was a sour, unsettled feeling, as if she teetered on the edge of darkness, staring into an abyss. The ring was too ostentatious. She was certain it wasn't suited to her taste, and it felt too snug. Had it not been sized correctly? Then again, something so expensive ought to be tight so it wouldn't risk being lost, especially if she was going to do more wandering around the woods at night. And if she was engaged, why did she wake in a cabin with no memory? Where was Mr. Wright in all of this?
Since the snow's abated, Warner told her, I can walk around the cabin, maybe down to the road, to see if I spot your car or mobile phone. If nothing turns up, we can call the police and see if anyone has filed a missing persons report.
Thank you. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay your generosity. Warner smiled, a reassuring expression that sent yet another wave of warmth through her. Smiling revealed faint crow's feet around his brown eyes. She suspected he was late 30s in age. How old was she? The answer didn't materialize. No, seriously, she said. I don't even know if I have money, so I quite literally might not be able to pay you back. He chuckled.
Let's focus on finding out who you are first. I saw you staring at the ring. Is it triggering anything?
Something vile. It triggered anger and resentment and the urge to yank it off. No names. She looked away and drank more of her coffee.
I guess we'll stick with Star for now.
What's in a name? She quipped. Though truthfully, her whole identity might be out there riding the wind on a name she needed only to remember. Before she could swirl down a black hole of anxious worry, Warner smiled again. She decidedly needed a colder beverage if she was going to have to endure his smile much longer.
Can I have a look at your head? He asked. I saw you rubbing it a few minutes ago. With the weather, we can't get you any sort of timely medical care.
Sure. She turned around and put a finger to the lump on her scalp where the injury was. He set down his coffee cup. With her back to him, she felt his fingers move her hair aside and gently palpate the skin. The tender contact sent gooseflesh rising along her arms.
Does it hurt?
She swallowed and shook her head. On the contrary, she could stand there for hours and let his hands roam her scalp.
The wound isn't open. You might want some anti-inflammatories for the swelling.
She turned back around as Warner withdrew his hands. Thanks. She hoped he didn't notice the huskiness in her voice.
I'm going to go.
His voice trailed as he blinked at her. She'd been staring at him and probably made him uncomfortable. Their bodies were so close, She could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. Had she forgotten her manners along with her identity? He cleared his throat.
I'll go see if there are any trails indicating where you came from.
I'll go with you. Wanting to get out of the house and into the cold in search of answers, Star placed her coffee cup on the table and prepared to follow him. She nearly ran into him when he abruptly turned back to look at her.
That won't be necessary. You should take your clothes off.
His eyes widened and his lips formed a surprise O at his own words.
I mean, they're filthy. It looks like you took a tumble in the dirt. You should stay here, warm up with coffee and a hot shower, and we'll find you some clean clothes while we wash these.
He stepped back from her as a flush spread into his cheeks. Looking away, he walked to the front door and slipped on his coat and galoshes before disappearing into a sea of white snow. Bandit followed him out the door. When Star turned around, all eyes were focused on her. Warner's parents stood shoulder to shoulder, his father with a spatula in one hand and his mother with a stick of butter. As they stared at her with amused half-smiles, the hopeful twinkle in their eyes made Star uncomfortable. She needed to get her memories back. "Can I help with anything?"
No, I've got breakfast under control,
Ralph said.
You just take it easy after that bump on the head. Ibuprofen is in that cabinet.
He gestured. "Lizzie, dear, when your father gets back, we can open your presents," Louise said. Star frowned, reminded that she was intruding on this family's picturesque Christmas morning. She needed her identity and a way to leave. She fetched the ibuprofen and took 2 with her coffee. Lizzie sat down at the kitchen table. "I have more presents than just Star and a new puppy?" She turned to Star. "Did you come down the fireplace? Is that why you're dirty?" Star smiled. "I wish I remembered." But she had dirt, not soot, on her pants and coat, and she did recall hiking through the snow and frigid air on her way to this cabin. Louise placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It'll come back, dear." Ralph stirred scrambled eggs on the stovetop.
I read somewhere that trauma combined with stress can cause amnesia. Maybe the Christmas spirit thought you needed a little stress relief. Something to temporarily forget your troubles.
"Like crashing someone else's Christmas?" Star chuckled. "I like Lizzie's idea. I'm actually a Santa factory robot, and I have no memories because I haven't made them yet." She started moving stiffly, as if she was the Tin Man himself. "Pardon me." "Pardon me," Star said in her most robotic voice. "Would you like me to butter your toast for you?" She picked up a butter knife and then let her arm dangle at the elbow as if on a hinge. Everyone laughed, and Star filled with instant satisfaction at her humor. Lizzie's giggle was especially heartwarming. Yes, humor was Star's friend. That much she was sure. It was an excellent defense mechanism against the harshness of reality. Humor could bring people together and bridge common ground. Maybe she was a comedian, but that didn't feel right. Humor was a coping mechanism for her, not a career. Warner entered the cabin and stared at his family's enjoyment of Star's humor as he held the puppy. He set Bandit on the carpet and closed the door behind him before shucking off his coat and boots. Everyone turned to look at him expectantly.
Nothing,
He said.
Snow covered all tracks. There are no vehicles at the end of the drive near the road.
He had assumed she'd come by car, But a car accident didn't explain the bump on the back of her head. Had something more dangerous happened to her last night? You should look on the roof, Lizzie said, for sleigh tracks. When he caught sight of Star's bright smile, he gave a lopsided grin.
Breakfast is ready,
Ralph announced.
I'm still in my pajamas,
Warner said. I still look like I rolled in mud, Star added. Warner winced. He wished he hadn't fumbled his words like that earlier. Oh, none of us mind. You've been through an ordeal. Louise waved a hand. After taking turns washing hands, the five of them sat around the table. Warner found himself sitting beside Star. This smells wonderful, she said. I don't know when I ate last, but my stomach seems to think it's been at least a day. But she didn't move to take any food. Not wanting her to remain hungry out of politeness, Warner filled each person's plate with eggs, bacon, and toast, including hers.
Let's hope we don't discover any food allergies you've forgotten about.
Yeah, that would be a bummer. I'm hungry enough to risk it. Any doctors or nurses in the vicinity? Daddy's a teacher of astronomy. Oh, star of wonder, star of light. Star looked around the table. I don't know where that came from. I guess it's appropriate for the season.
John Henry Hopkins. My favorite Christmas song, since it's about stars.
Where do you teach?
University of Virginia. We're just renting this cabin for the holidays.
Warner, Lizzie, Ralph, and Louise. Star pointed around the table to indicate each of them. Seems my short-term memory is functional.
We're the Orions,
Ralph said. So it's Professor Orion? She asked Warner.
Warner is fine.
We live in Charlottesville, Louise added. Except for my mom, Lizzie interjected. She lives in heaven. Oh. Daddy says she went to be with the constellations 3 years ago. I don't remember her. Warner patted Lizzie's shoulder. Star swallowed a bite of bacon. I remember seeing a beautiful star last night when I was wandering around in the cold. It shone particularly bright right over this cabin. Warner ignored the inquiring glances his parents cast his direction.
Planets can seem like stars. This time of year, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars can look bright in the night sky. Lizzie nodded and swallowed a bite of eggs. The first night we stayed at the cabin, Daddy and me looked at constellations, Perseus and Aries. To avoid his family exploring the star their guests claimed to see, Warner seized the opportunity to launch into a dissertation about which constellations were best seen this time of year from the northern hemisphere. After breakfast, Lizzie busied herself playing with Bandit, and Warner tried not to think about the tears that would flow when both Star and the puppy had to reunite with the rest of their family. Since his daughter was preoccupied with the ball of fur, he decided he would clean himself up before opening presents and give Star the same opportunity. His mother led her off into the unused room with a bathroom. Warner dressed in blue jeans and a sweater before taming his bedhead. After that, he called the local police station to ask if anyone had reported a missing woman. No one had. He left his number and Star's description so they could contact him when her fiancé started looking for her. Warner instantly didn't like this man. Why hadn't he called the police yet? Was he waiting for the fabled 24-hour missing persons rule invented by movie directors? If Warner had someone like Star in his life,
He would have called the police after an hour of her unexplained absence, especially in a snowstorm and with escaped convicts on the loose. He thought about the bump on her head and wondered what or who had been responsible. He scowled at the phone after he hung up. Authorities had been a dead end, and although Star seemed to be in good condition, she had a point about the availability of medical care. Since she'd hit her head hard enough to induce amnesia, she probably needed to be evaluated by a doctor. But the roads might take a day or two to be cleared by the Department of Transportation. He should start shoveling the long driveway now, so he would be done by the time the service vehicles finished the roads. It wouldn't do much good to have a drivable road with no driveway to get there. An hour later, everyone convened in the living room where Lizzie tore at wrapping paper. Bandit seemed to understand the object of the game was to shred paper, and so he dutifully did his part with small, sharp teeth. Star sat on the couch beside Louise, looking extremely entertained by his daughter and the puppy. She wore clean clothes he suspected were his mother's, baggy jeans and a long-sleeved t-shirt. The woman's dark mahogany hair and bright blue eyes were a stunning contrast to each other. He'd stood a little too close to those eyes earlier. They were the sky on a cloudless day, superimposed over space itself with sparkling stars and nebula in the background. Andromeda eyes. When his father nudged him, Warner realized he'd been staring at Star. He immediately turned his attention back to his daughter and her toys. If he wasn't careful, he'd end up becoming as attached to Star as Lizzie was, even though he'd only just met her, and his attraction defied logic. Chapter 4. After present opening, Warner bundled up Lizzie and took her outside to play in the snow. Star joined them, wearing his mom's coat while her clothes were in the washing machine. Bandit dutifully followed at her heel. "I'm going to walk around and see if I can jostle any memories." She tugged her pink hat down over her head. Warner suspected she wanted to look around for her phone and car for herself, which was a good idea since it might trigger some recollection. He knelt down and helped Lizzie pile snow to build a snowman. Playing together reinforced how renting the cabin had been a great idea. He needed more time like this devoted to the two of them. When Star returned from her unfruitful expedition, Lizzie invited her to join them for snowman building. "Sure." Star adjusted her gloves. "Maybe it will churn some memories to the surface. Perhaps I'm a talented sculptor, and when I create art, my amnesia will dissolve." She winked at Lizzie. "Let's get to work, Michelangelo." Warner chuckled. Together, the three of them rolled and packed snow in 3 large balls. "I'm amazed how you're taking all of this in stride," Warner said. "What do you mean?" Star asked. "If I had knocked my head hard enough to wake somewhere with no memories, I'd probably be more distraught. Grown men have cried over less." Star laughed as she packed in more snow to one of the balls. "That hardly seems productive. Anyway, these things take time, right? Besides, I crashed your Christmas. I would only make it worse if I moped and complained. And I could have frozen out there in the winter night. So I guess I'm feeling fortunate to be alive rather than unfortunate to not remember who I am. Some might even call my present state a miracle."
"A Christmas miracle? You're a cup half full kind of woman."
Warner picked up the middle of the snowman and placed it on top of the larger sphere on the ground. "I think I'm more of an add more to the cup if you're not happy with the fluid level kind of woman."
"I like that."
Warner enjoyed Star's easy presence. Her smile and warm voice lightened any mood. He recalled himself having a better sense of humor once upon a time. When Lizzie was a baby, he'd excelled at making her smile and giggle. He'd been the playful dad, whose wife had demanded he parent more and play less. After she'd passed, he'd become more like the father she'd asked of him. But Lizzie needed moments like today in her life, and he needed to do better enriching their quality time with joy. Building a snowman was a start. Star lifted the head of the snowman and placed it securely on top of the other two balls. "Are you okay?" Warner nodded as he produced two loose buttons and a carrot out of his coat pocket.
I'm good. This has been fun. I was thinking how we needed this fun in our lives.
He let Lizzie do the honors of creating a face for the snowman. When the character was complete, including stick arms, the three of them stood back to survey their work. "What did one snowman say to the other?" Star asked Lizzie. "I don't know." "Do you smell carrots?" Lizzie giggled. Star's smile faded into a frown as she scrutinized their creation. "No, I don't think I'm any kind of artist."
No, but that gives me an idea, Warner said. We can do different activities throughout the day and see if any of them jog your memory.
"I'd like that." Star packed a small snowball, starting with a snowball fight. She handed the snowball to Lizzie, who took the cue and hurled it at her father. He gaped in pretend shock as it splattered harmlessly against his coat. Lizzie's delightful laughter filled the air. "Run for cover!" Star shouted with a mischievous grin. Lizzie followed her behind a large tree trunk. Bandit ran with them, bounding through the snow.
"Where's the loyalty to family?"
Warner asked his daughter with playful incredulity. "Take no prisoners!" Star cried. They volleyed snowballs back and forth, 2 against 1, with Star mostly feeding snowballs to Lizzie. In the end, Warner launched an offensive attack. When he got close to Lizzie, he picked her up and spun her in a circle as she giggled. "You're covered in snow!" she cried.
"Thanks to you,"
he said. He looked at Star and realized she'd somehow managed to dodge all of the snowballs. She dashed through the snow, light on her feet, rolled and ducked without ever having taken a hit. Now, after robust activity, she looked angelic, with rosy cheeks surrounded by dark hair framed in a snowy landscape. She picked up Bandit and cradled the puppy.
"Maybe you're an acrobat,"
he suggested to Star as he sat Lizzie back down on the ground. He brushed snow out of his hair as he shivered.
"I think snow got inside my coat. Let's get inside, warm up, and have a little hot chocolate."
"Hot chocolate!" Lizzie beamed. After hot chocolate, Lizzie and Star sculpted the solar system out of Play-Doh while Warner and his mom prepared Christmas dinner. "Definitely not a sculptor," Star said, surveying her lumpy planets. Warner grinned when he looked up from his turkey basting. She ran a finger along a few calluses on her hands. Their appearance suggested she wasn't averse to getting her hands dirty, but not so much that manual labor constituted her livelihood. Her nails were trimmed short. The snowball fight had felt like she was in her element. She was agile and could predict people's intentions from slight shifts in weight and body language. After her shower earlier, she had looked over her body for evidence of the past that might trigger her memory. She'd had some type of orthoscopic knee surgery. As for her age, she guessed she was about 30. Her abdomen was smooth and flat, indicative of good fitness and no sign of stretch marks. She glanced at Lizzie molding the Play-Doh. Did the other woman want children? Did her fiancé? "Do you remember anything?" the child said, rolling out yellow Play-Doh for Saturn's rings. Star picked up a handful of yellow Play-Doh and massaged it with her fingers. "I woke up in the cold snow in the dark of night with Bandit tucked in my jacket." Star began the story in a tone more like a tale than the truth, since the experience seemed fanciful. "Then I saw a bright star, except this star wasn't high in the sky. It hung just over the horizon of the trees and then dropped into the forest. So I followed it here to this cabin." The glowing light she had seen had gone so far as to illuminate the correct numbers on the key code so she could let herself inside the cabin. She decided to omit that part since it seemed too surreal. "I was so exhausted that I plopped on the couch and slept." Lizzie beamed at her with a wide smile and large brown eyes. "Wow! Grandma, did you hear that?" Louise chuckled. "I sure did." She was mixing stuffing in a large bowl. Warner stared at Star in shock. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked. Louise reached over and closed Warner's mouth with a finger under his jaw. "Not at all, dear. We have a long history with the Christmas star." "What do you mean?" Star set the Play-Doh down. Warner averted his gaze as he busied himself mixing mashed potatoes with intense vigor. Louise explained. "Every year, someone in the Orion family reports seeing a star, unexplained by constellations or planets. It may be in the sky or on Earth, or even more of a light than a star, but it always precedes a miracle."
Or directly causes one,
Ralph interjected, planting a kiss on his wife's cheek. Yes, Ralph was walking downtown, and a bright star in a window caught his attention. Too bright to be a light on the inside, and not the right angle to be the sun reflecting off something. Anyway, he hesitated crossing the road and avoided getting hit by a truck running the traffic light. "That must have been scary," Star said. "We've come to believe the star is our Christmas spirit looking out for us," Louise said. "Does it always save lives?" Star asked, thinking about how the star she'd seen had saved her life by leading her to the cabin. "No, sometimes it presents opportunity. Sometimes it gives strength," Louise said. "How so?"
It gave our niece strength one year when she was desolate about her overseas tour. She's out of the Marines now, but those were tough times,"
Ralph said, washing mixing bowls and measuring cups. Star smiled. "I love your Christmas star story, and maybe it led me here because it knew your family would be so kind while I get my memories back." "Daddy says the star is love, but doesn't give love." Lizzie put a speck of Play-Doh on the largest planet to represent Jupiter's red spot. "What does he mean by that?" Star asked. She poked at the planet without looking up. "I told him I wanted a new mom, and he said the star doesn't work that way. That's why I said you must be from Santa." "Oh." A new mom, which meant a new wife for Warner. She glanced in his direction, but he was stirring something in a small pot, possibly gravy, on the stove as if creating a culinary masterpiece. The conversation about the Christmas star and Lizzie's wish seemed to make him uncomfortable. And here was Star, feeding into Lizzie's dreams and complicating his situation. Lizzie, you and your father are wonderful people. The right new mom will come along when it's time. I wouldn't worry about that. The room fell silent as Star rolled the tiniest ball of black Play-Doh to represent Pluto. Chapter 5. Over dinner, Warner and his parents told Star about their ski trip to Wintergreen last year and their plans to go again in February. Lizzie talked animatedly about her first time skiing and riding the lifts. He enjoyed her enthusiasm, as it gave him the feeling he was succeeding as a single father. Daddy's really good. He can ski backwards like the ski instructor, and he can do the black slopes. I have to practice more to get to blue first. When they finished the meal and Warner began clearing the table, Star jumped to help. He started washing as she brought plates and platters to him. Louise took Lizzie upstairs for her evening bath as Ralph plopped into the living room recliner with his iPad in hand.
Ever been skiing?
Warner asked her, needing the conversation to keep his thoughts platonic as he learned more about her. She shook her head. Not sure. It's not conjuring images. I feel like I would enjoy it if that makes sense. The rush of speed, the wind in my hair.
You think you have a daredevil side?
Adventurous. She grinned, handing him an empty platter. She hadn't spoken the word in a flirtatious manner, but rather matter-of-factly. Still, Warner briefly entertained what it might be like to explore her adventurous side before squelching those thoughts.
Hopefully not the type of adventure these yahoos are taking,
Ralph interjected as he thumped his fingers against his iPad screen.
What's that, Dad? These escaped convicts, the Grinch brothers. Yeah, I saw them on the news yesterday. Well, they won't get anywhere today with the snow and ice.
The weather also kept Star under Warner's roof, but fortunately they had an unused bedroom so she wouldn't have to crash on the couch again. But their time had an expiration date, a much-needed one, he reminded himself, since she had her own family to return to. After the dishes were done, Warner tucked Lizzie into bed. His daughter had carried Bandit with her, but he seemed to be looking around for his owner.
He belongs to Star, sweetie.
He didn't need Lizzie sleeping with the dog and bonding that much more. Today was the best Christmas ever. He chuckled.
I'm glad you had fun.
He tucked the covers around her. Can Star stay? Sometimes you talk about her leaving, but I don't want to give her back. She's our present from Santa.
She has to go back to her family. I'm sure they miss her.
But she doesn't have a family.
Everyone has a family. She doesn't remember them right now, but she will.
Don't send Star away. He hung his head. There was no winning this battle, and Lizzie's worry suggested he would be the one to take the blame when Star had to leave.
Let's read one of the books we brought from home.
He started to read Where the Wild Things Are, and Lizzie thankfully relaxed into the story. After kissing her forehead and bidding goodnight, he went back downstairs and put sheets on the bed in the extra room so Star would have a place to sleep. When he went back into the living room, he scanned the area for Star.
Outside,
his father said from the recliner as he scrolled through his electronic notebook.
Was I that obvious?
Ralph shrugged without looking up. Warner bundled up and stepped onto the back porch where Star was gazing up at a crescent moon. The sky was clear now, though another snowfall was expected in the early morning.
Can I join you?
He asked her. Certainly. He closed the sliding glass door behind him. I'm sure I've stared at the sky 100 times in my lifetime, but tonight it feels magical, she said.
I never get tired of stargazing.
But he didn't look up at them. He was admiring the silhouette of her face, committing it to memory for when, in the words of Lizzie, he sent Star away. He tore his gaze from her to look at the sky.
You see those two brighter stars? Those are the heads of the Gemini twins. If you follow them down and connect the dots, you'll see two stick figures holding hands. One head, the brightest, is Castor, a star system 52 light-years from Earth. The other head, Pollux, is a giant star with an extrasolar planet revolving around it.
It's amazing. She craned her head back as she stargazed, and Warner glimpsed the soft, pale skin of her neck. She shook her head. I don't know about twins, though. They look nothing alike. Castor's head is bigger, and his legs are longer.
Warner laughed. Agreed. In Greek mythology, they're actually not twins. Over there is the Orion constellation. You can find it by the 3 stars in alignment representing the hunter's belt.
Hunter?
In Greek mythology, Orion was a supernaturally strong giant and hunter. When he threatened to kill every creature on Earth, Gaia sent a scorpion on him.
Kudos to Mother Earth.
And that's why you won't see Orion and Scorpius in the sky at the same time.
She turned to look at him. Fascinating. I guess you learn a lot of Greek mythology in astronomy.
Greek, Middle East, European. It is fascinating. Mankind has been staring at the same sky for millions of years and making up stories about the stars.
She shivered. I think if it wasn't so cold, I could lay on a deck chair and stare up for hours. Good night, Warner, and thank you again for today. He remained on the deck as she went back inside the cabin. He had only convinced his wife to stargaze a few times before they married. It seemed life had grown busy after that, and they hadn't made the effort to stay connected. If they hadn't taken their time together for granted and had known it would be so brief, he liked to think they would have enjoyed more moments like this. Perhaps. If he ever did find love again, he was going to savor it until the end. Star crawled into bed, joined by Bandit. When he nestled into her hair, she had a feeling he was accustomed to this routine. She wished she could remember. And yet her day had been so blissful, she wondered how it compared to her regular life. Was there a reason she couldn't remember who she was? Was there something she psychologically wanted to leave behind, as Ralph had alluded to? She felt the ring on her finger, and momentarily felt sad to think there might be someone out there whose love she was missing, and vice versa. Was the man to whom she was engaged half the man Warner was? But a comparison wasn't fair to her mystery fiancé. She had a history with that man, while she'd only known Warner for a day. A day of carefree fun and lingering stares. She'd meant what she said about stargazing for hours, but hadn't added that she would enjoy it more if he was beside her describing the constellations and the stories written about them in his deep, soothing voice. How ridiculous was she to be drawn to a man she'd only just met? But it wasn't just Warner. His entire family had enchanted her. Was she this fanciful in her real life? Or had she been entranced by the magic of the holiday season? What if she came face to face with her fiancé and didn't want that life anymore? No. Something would trigger her memory, and she would go back to being the person she was. Perhaps she could stay friends with Warner, gentleman, and family man. How many families would have been so accommodating on Christmas Day to a stranger dropping in abruptly and unannounced? She rubbed around Bandit's ears, which seemed to calm her as much as it did the dog. Time. Time and patience would restore her memories. She couldn't stay in a fantasy of Christmas every day and insert herself into Lizzie's life. Her presence seemed unfair to the child. Star had seen Warner's mixed emotions throughout the day. Enjoyment of how smitten Lizzie was with her, and turmoil at what the child would go through when she left, especially since Lizzie thought she was her special Santa delivery. Star slipped into sleep, imagining she would dream of sugar plums and snowball fights, but instead something darker invaded her mind. She found herself dressed in black combat fatigues with a knife strapped to one thigh. She looked down at the weapon she was holding, an AK-47. How did she know the name of the monstrosity in her hands? She glanced at two other men around her, also in black fatigues with the same automatic weapons. Their faces looked hard and battle-ready.
Hey, Mad Eye, which one do you want to take for interrogation?
One of the men asked her. Mad Eye? No. Something was very wrong here. She looked at the people the man had gestured towards. 5 individuals knelt on the dirt with black masks over their heads. Their hands were secured behind their back with twist ties. They wore civilian clothing, blue jeans and khaki pants. From the parts of their bodies she could see, they were all Caucasian, some men and some women. The one in the middle, she heard herself say, in a voice more rigid than she used at any point during Christmas Day. What? No, no, no. This was all wrong. She was holding unarmed hostages at gunpoint. What kind of maniac was she? One of the men swung the AK-47 over his shoulder and around his back, where the strap held it in place. He then grabbed the hostage in the middle, a woman, up by the ponytail beneath her hood. She gasped and struggled to her feet. He roughly led her away with a thick, meaty hand on the captive's forearm. Star jolted up in bed, panting. She tried to shake the scene from her mind, even as the sensation of holding cold, deadly steel in her fingertips lingered. It had only been a dream. Nightmares happened all the time, and that didn't make them real. But it felt real. Cold sweat trickled down her neck. The scene she'd just witnessed felt like a memory. Adventurous, she told Warner. But perhaps she should have said dangerous. Heart still thudding, she left Bandit sleeping in the bed and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. Warner had woken at 4 a.m. and been unable to fall back to sleep. He worked on his laptop in bed, but then searched the internet for information on amnesia. The details he found suggested the problem was as his father mentioned, triggered by a combination of trauma and also emotional stress. But either could cause amnesia without the other. Warner wondered what emotional distress such a lovely, personable woman might have experienced that could have contributed to memory loss. He also learned that memory loss didn't wipe one's personality, meaning that the humorous, engaging Star he knew was the same type of person prior to arriving on his couch, though perhaps unburdened by what had been troubling her. He wondered if it had something to do with her engagement. Every time she looked at her ring, her brow furrowed. He would have expected the sight of it and all it represented to cause a smile. His ears perked up at the sound of noise coming from downstairs. Lizzie? She rarely got up in the night, but she'd had quite an exciting day, what with Santa's supposed gift. He thought he'd better go down and check. He arrived in the kitchen to see Star set a glass of water down and lean heavily on the counter, dropping her head to her chin.
Are you okay?
He asked. She took a shaky breath. Bad dream. She wore a flannel pajama shirt that covered down to her mid-thigh. He hadn't realized his mother had swiped one of his shirts for Star, but never had the garment looked so good.
Can I get you anything?
She looked up at him through those long lashes and with those big blue eyes deep enough to drown in. He couldn't afford to dive into that place. He swallowed hard and stood frozen. She rolled her neck in a slow circle. Do you think I could have been a bad person in my other life?
No,
He said without hesitation. He gave a nervous chuckle. More firmly, he said,
I wouldn't believe that for a second. You have a good heart.
I hope you're right.
Do you want to talk about the dream?
No. Against his better judgment for what this was going to do to his heart in the near future, he stepped toward Star and took her into his arms. She didn't shed a tear, but she did relax into him. Her fingers curled the back of his pajama shirt into tight little balls, as if she was squeezing the tension out of herself and into those concentrated spots. He smelled the scent of vanilla in her hair and had the audacity to observe how nicely their bodies fit together. He gave her one last, purely platonic squeeze before pulling away and turning toward the coffee maker.
Let's get some caffeine started.
He hoped she didn't notice the huskiness in his voice. Thank you, Warner.
He cleared his throat. We'll do more activities today and see if any of your memories surface.
Chapter 6. Star diced tomatoes, mushrooms, green peppers, and onions while Warner cooked Italian sausage on a cast-iron skillet. Lizzie played on the floor with Bandit and a small stick Warner had given her. She laughed and squealed as he chased her and climbed all over her. Star watched, amused, but also ready to intervene if the puppy played too rough for a 6-year-old. Since her clothes had been washed, Star was back in her comfy jeans and sweater. She had spent the morning walking outside and trying to remember her past. The scent of fresh vegetables filled the kitchen. For a few moments, as Star held the large knife and methodically chopped, she thought about her nightmare and the knife that had been strapped to her thigh. Ontario ASEC Aircrew TM Survival Egress Knife. Her blood chilled at the thought of what her former life consisted of, that she would know different types of weapons. In fact, in her mind's eye, she could picture different types of knives and their names.
How's it going over there?
Warner asked.
Any sudden sensations, like you might be an award-winning chef?
She let out a nervous chuckle and shelved further thoughts about types of weapons. No chef, but something about the weight of the knife feels familiar. Maybe I'm a carny, a knife thrower in a circus. Warner arched a playful eyebrow. Star spun the handle of the kitchen knife in the palm of her hand, followed by the flick of her wrist into the air for a triple flip before she caught the handle again. Wow, that was cool, Lizzie said. Star smiled at her newly discovered talent before faltering when she caught the nervous look in Warner's eyes. She dropped her head and resumed chopping onions as he added the sausage to the spaghetti sauce. She moved on to spreading the garlic butter onto the Italian bread while Warner cooked noodles. His parents and Lizzie set to work setting the table. Over lunch, Star learned that Warner's parents were retired. His father was a former political science teacher, and his mother had taught high school algebra. As she twirled noodles and sauce onto her fork, she observed how she hadn't forgotten how to eat spaghetti. "What about you, Lizzie? What are you going to be when you grow up?" She wondered if the girl would carry on the teaching tradition. "I want to be an astronaut." With an astronomer as a father, you probably know all about space, planet, and the galaxies. An astronaut sounds exciting. During their Play-Doh sculpting, Lizzie had sized the planets to scale and lined them up accurately. "What are you going to do if your memories don't come back?" the girl asked her. "When the snow is cleared up, I should be able to find my car again, or truck, or whatever I drive. Hopefully, I'll find my purse with identification or vehicle registration. Once I have that information, I'll be able to reconnect with my family and rediscover who I am." She made it sound simple and cheery, but so many ifs lurked in there. If she had a car, if she found her car, if she had a family, and if seeing them triggered the return of her memories. She at least had a fiancé somewhere. "Lizzie, are there any games you want to play?" Louise asked, changing the subject. "Yeah!" Louise stood and began clearing the table. "The other day, I noticed the owners keep games in the cabinet over there. Why don't you dig in and see what looks fun? You, Star, and your dad can play on the coffee table." Lizzie bounded out of her chair to pick out a game. "I can help," Star said, picking up her plate to clear the table. "You are helping." Louise nodded in Lizzie's direction as she took the plate from Star. Star followed Warner over to the coffee table in the living room as Lizzie pulled out Operation. They formed a circle sitting cross-legged on the carpet. Bandit crawled into her lap and rested his head on her knee. Star helped them put the plastic body parts in the man and checked the functionality of the game. A few minutes into the game, Star was winning.
"Those are some steady hands,"
Warner said. She'd relaxed after the big meal to enjoy the moment with father and daughter, but hadn't intended to win. Did she have a competitive side too? "Maybe I'm a surgeon," she grinned, but it faded quickly. What if she was marrying a surgeon? She didn't think she would enjoy a relationship with someone who worked long hours. Unless, of course, she worked long hours too. Ralph peered over to survey her work.
"Fine motor skills. Maybe you make jewelry."
"Artistic painter," Louise suggested from the kitchen sink. Star used the tweezers to reach for the butterfly in the upper abdomen. But what organ was actually there? A little to the left, the man's right, would be the liver. To the right, the man's left, would be the stomach. Between those was the xiphoid process. Thrusting a sharp weapon upward and under the xiphoid would puncture the heart. How? No, why did she know that? Her hand shook, setting off the electric buzzer, and she dropped the plastic butterfly.
"You okay?"
Warner asked. Without making eye contact, she passed off the tweezers. "Yeah, your turn." When they finished the game, Bandit found his way into Warner's lap. He chuckled and petted the playful puppy. His hair felt soft, like a cashmere sweater with a mix of black, browns, white, and russet colors. He tried to gauge how old the dog might be. Maybe 6 months? He was some type of gorgeous husky hybrid, but the breed he'd been mixed with would make him smaller than a standard husky when full grown, probably more manageable for a 6-year-old girl. Whoa. He was definitely not thinking about a puppy for Lizzie. He continued to pet the dog, who advanced into his lap and climbed higher and higher, trying to reach to lick his face. Up close, Warner got a good look at the dog's eyes. The irises reminded him of Star's eyes, a kaleidoscope of blue and silver. He still puzzled over how the woman had arrived at his cabin and wondered what the connection was to some of her ongoing strange behavior. She had a good sense of humor and warm smile, but moments appeared when she grew a little more guarded. He wondered if she glimpsed her past and found it unpleasant. He wished she would open up to him, and maybe they could explore whatever pieces she was remembering together. But they hardly knew each other. Why would she open up to him? Bandit nipped at his hand and then drew back slightly as if knowing he'd done something he wasn't supposed to. Warner scratched around his ears to let him know all was forgiven. Who wouldn't forgive a face like that? Maybe when Star left, he could buy himself and Lizzie a consolation prize in the form of a new puppy. It wouldn't be this one, but it would be something. In the late afternoon, they sat around the fire reading books. Warner read a Dan Brown novel. Star had picked up The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Ralph flipped through A Christmas Carol, and Louise read Shel Silverstein poems to Lizzie.
I'm going to grab some firewood.
Warner carried his boots from the front door to the back, where a large porch overlooked the snowy mountainside. He'd discovered on their first day that firewood was stored beneath the porch, which wrapped around the side and back of the cabin. Star stood and set aside her book. "I'll help. I could use a leg stretch." He noticed that if someone else was working, Star couldn't be idle. She was helpful by nature, an attribute he admired. After they bundled in coats and boots, they ventured onto the back porch. Light snow fell from a gray, dusky sky. Dark tree branches carried a layer of powder on top. Deep green pine needles protruded from the cone-shaped snow covering the pine trees. Star gasped. "It's beautiful out here."
Yes, it is.
But he wasn't looking at the mountain view. When she noticed his stare, her cheeks flushed. Warner pulled his gaze away from her lovely face and turned abruptly. He started down the stairs, silently scolding himself for his behavior, again. Several inches of snow layered each step. He needed to scrape those clear before carrying the wood back up. A few steps from the bottom, the trek turned slippery as the snow, now packed into the soles of his boots, obliterated the tread on the bottom. He held onto the rail but felt his footing go, and he began to pitch forward. A hand clamped over his coat, steadying him. "Gotcha."
Thanks. Those are some quick reflexes,
he said, noting she was strong too. When she let go, he carefully reached the bottom of the stairs. He turned and extended a hand to help her down, but when she went to take his hand, her footing slipped. He moved to catch her elbow and keep her from falling, but his sudden motion made him slip backward and pull her with him. He landed in the soft snow as she landed on top of him. He stared in stunned silence at how close her lips were to his. Her dark hair fell around her, spilling onto him. "I'm sorry." Her voice sounded breathless.
It's my fault.
He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear.
I'm sorry.
Her head lowered slightly and stopped, making a kiss an entirely too easy undertaking. "Warner."
Don't,
he said firmly. shattering any possibility of intimacy. He shifted his weight.
I'll help you up.
They pushed to their feet and brushed off snow. Warner didn't know what Star intended to say, but any of it would have been wrong. He didn't want any words expressing an attraction they couldn't explore. He didn't want an apology for circumstances out of her control. She was here alone and yet unavailable. Those were the only facts he needed to accept. He grabbed the shovel next to the woodpile and began clearing the snow from the stairs. Star filled her arms with chopped wood and silently walked past him up the stairs onto the porch and back into the house. Star came back down for another load of wood and passed Warner as he scraped the stairs with a small dirt shovel while avoiding eye contact with her. She'd screwed up that moment. The man had the decency to let her stay under his roof and eat his food, and she had the audacity to contemplate kissing him. She was lucky all he did was give her a command, "Don't," rather than send her packing. Was the phrase still "send her packing" if she had nothing to pack? She walked past an axe and rake propped against one wall, as the shovel had been before Warner put it to use. After loading more logs into her arms, she headed for the stairs. She briefly considered walking up the slope on the side of the house to the front door to avoid traipsing through Warner's snow removal project, but the way appeared just steep enough she might need her hands free to help with balance. She chose the stairs and walked up with the logs as unobtrusively as she could. Was this the type of woman she was? Literally falling over the first man she met? Not only was she engaged and filled with dangerous knowledge about how to mortally wound someone, she had held hostages at gunpoint. She did not need to bring her sordid past or present into this man's peaceful life with his family. After dropping off the wood, she went out the front and rechecked the roads. Not safe yet. She borrowed Louise's phone and called the police, but still no one had reported a missing woman. She needed only keep her hands and mouth to herself until the roads cleared. In the meantime, she'd be sure to earn her keep. Chapter 7. After dinner, they played Scrabble, and Louise beat everyone in the word game. Star enjoyed the family banter, red wine, and faint Christmas music playing in the background. Louise stood. "Lizzie, hun, let's get bath and bedtime going." Warner started to stand.
I'll take care of it, Mom.
She waved a hand at him. "Nonsense, you've got company. Say goodnight, Lizzie." Reluctantly, Lizzie stood from her toys still around the tree and went to her father. "Night, Dad." He gave her a long, lingering hug.
Good night, sweetheart.
To Star's surprise, Lizzie came to her next and stepped right into her, wrapping small arms around her neck. "Night, Star." Star returned the embrace, feeling her small body, and shocked at the way her own heart swelled at the gesture. "Good night, Lizzie. I had so much fun with you today." "Me too." The girl pulled away and looked up at her. "Best Christmas ever." She bent down and patted Bandit, who was gnawing on a stick beside Star. A lump caused Star's throat to close beyond the ability to speak. Tears welled briefly in her eyes, but she blinked them away. Surely, if she was some hardened killer, a 6-year-old couldn't bring her to tears.
Do you want to try chess next?
Warner asked Star, as they shuffled letters back into the Scrabble box. "Sure." Ralph moved to sit in the recliner, thumbing through his iPad.
Police are still hunting for the Grinch brothers.
Star set up the pieces on the chessboard. Beg your pardon? She remembered he'd mentioned them last night as well. Warner moved a bishop.
They're actually the Green brothers, and they broke out of jail. The news is calling them the Grinch brothers because they escaped on Christmas Eve.
Ralph added,
They were spotted driving a red pickup, hightailing it west. They ought to be clean through to Tennessee by now, unless they're stuck somewhere due to the inclement weather.
A sharp pain hit Star's left temple and streaked behind her eye. She pressed her palm to her orbit, and the pain passed as quickly as it had come.
Are you okay?
Warner asked. Just tired.
We don't have to play.
No, I want to play. 45 minutes later, Warner tipped his king over and accepted defeat humbly.
Well done. Perhaps you have a career involving strategy. Congratulations.
I'm not sure that narrows it down, but I'll admit it feels nice to succeed at something today, Star said, repositioning the game pieces. Louise returned from tucking Lizzie into bed. She walked over to the stereo and turned up the volume on the Christmas music. May I have this dance? She asked Ralph.
Of course.
He rose from his chair, set down the iPad, and took her in his arms. They danced and swayed to Jingle Bell Rock. Star watched them, wondering what the security of a long-term relationship like that would feel like. So far, she had a mystery fiancé who still hadn't reported her missing. Warner extended a hand toward her.
Care to dance?
She took the hand and he pulled her up. I don't know if I know how.
You could be a seasoned ballroom dancer. Only one way to find out.
She laughed as he twirled her. She discovered she had the rhythm to dance. She felt like butter in his hands, moving and turning to the slightest pressure from his fingertips. At the end of the song, he took her into a low dip. She laughed as he uprighted her in his arms. Silent Night began playing. They froze in each other's arms, unsure if a slow dance was a good idea. The room felt suddenly hot. Star looked over to see Warner's parents observing the pair of them with inquisitive stares. Star and Warner simultaneously stepped back from each other, their arms falling to their sides. I should go to bed, she stammered. She bid everyone good night and took Bandit outside, partly to let him take care of business before calling it a night, and partly to let the frigid air cool her fervor. She wanted to stick her head in the snow like an ostrich. Did such chemistry really flare between two people who'd only known each other 2 days? Warner set her core alight with his dark, dancing eyes, making her feel like a star about to burst. Maybe this was a side effect of amnesia, wanting to emotionally latch to the first person she saw. Except she was no imprinting baby duck. She was a hot-blooded woman, but she was also a rational adult who wouldn't succumb to impulse. She wasn't right for Warner and Lizzie, although surely some sort of hardened, gun-toting killer wouldn't be flustered and feverish in the arms of a man. Nothing made sense in her life, and drawing Warner into the disarray was unfair. Warner stood speechless as Star disappeared. What had he been thinking asking her to dance? She'd had such longing in her eyes watching his parents dance that he wanted to erase her sadness. And stars above, he'd wanted to kiss her. What kind of man made a move on an engaged woman? He ran a hand through his hair and realized his parents were still watching him. At least Lizzie hadn't been around to see her father's ridiculous behavior. He didn't want to send her mixed messages about a woman who would soon be out of their lives.
I think I've lost my mind.
He told them. For being attracted to a beautiful woman? His mom asked gently. He looked at the pair of them, arm in arm. He wanted what they had.
First woman to come along since Tina's death, and I'm throwing myself at her. Not the first,
His father pointed out. Warner couldn't argue that point. He'd had a few opportunities, but had let them fizzle. That wasn't throwing yourself at her, his mother said.
She's been here less than 2 days, and she's engaged.
There's a reason she's here, Louise said, even if we don't yet know why.
Are you implying she's our Christmas miracle?
She did say a star brought her here. He puffed out his cheeks and blew out a slow exhale. He wanted to believe in their family tradition of the Christmas star, but it didn't extend to relationships as far as he knew. And if he allowed himself to become any more attached to Star, his heart would be shredded that much more when she had to return to her family. He glimpsed the fire in her eyes several times, and those moments thrilled him more than they should have. Her attraction to him flattered him and fueled his desires to touch her. His actions weren't fair to her, probably making her feel unfaithful to her future husband. Star woke with a start. Memories or another nightmare? Images of violence flashed before her eyes. She'd been somewhere with dry air and brittle dirt. She hunkered behind a stone half-wall with a dozen other men and women. They were taking enemy fire, but they were also returning it. She'd been shooting at people. What kind of monster was she? The kind that didn't need to be around a peaceful family in an isolated cabin. She rolled out of bed and started to dress. Was she a danger to them? She refused to be responsible for bringing violence into their lives. She glanced at the bedside clock. 5:30 a.m. She hadn't heard anyone in the Orion family stirring and decided she needed to leave before one of them saw her. She didn't want to explain an abrupt departure, because that would involve describing her dreams. And then they would learn what type of person she really was. She folded Warner's flannel nightshirt and left it on top of the bed, resisting the juvenile urge to take something of his with her. After she entered the kitchen, she found a blank piece of paper and pen and left a note. She grabbed a bottle of water and a container of lunch meat from the fridge to make sure she had Bandit taken care of in case the walk proved long. She promised herself she'd find the Orion family later and pay them back for everything. She put on her coat, hat, and gloves, then tucked the puppy and the perishables inside her coat before slipping on her boots. She stepped out of the door, quietly closing it behind her. The gray morning was cold, but a brisk pace would keep her warm. Her boots crunched on the snow as she walked to the end of the driveway. With relief, she noted the road now looked passable. She walked along the highway as close to the piled mounds of snow as she could, as she tried to make sense of the pieces of a life she couldn't remember or reassemble. Hostages. Mad-Eye. Engaged. Bits of memories continued to pepper her mind as if someone chucked puzzle pieces at her with no cover image for reference. Oh, I wish you had found a man instead of a dog. Whose voice was that? A woman. Older, maybe 60s.
Uh-huh. You sure you're not up to some secret spy mission?
Another familiar voice, but this one was male and younger. His tone sounded teasing. playful.
We're under attack! We need an extraction!
A harsh, commanding voice screamed. Warner dressed and headed downstairs, filled with a mixture of excitement and dread. He quite enjoyed seeing Star first thing in the morning, but she wasn't his to keep. And why should he want to? He'd only known her 2 days, and she was engaged. Today, the roads would be cleared, and they would continue the hunt for her identity, this time beyond the confines of the cabin. He would try the police department and missing persons registries again. Surely by now her fiancé would have reported her missing. When he reached the kitchen, the lack of light and prepared coffee told him she wasn't awake yet. Maybe she was sleeping well this time. He turned on the light and started the brewer, admittedly not as stealthy as he could have been, in hopes of waking her and having the first few quiet moments of daylight to share with her. Then he spotted a note addressed to him. No. His heart ached and started to drip, 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 like a leaky faucet. How had he let himself get so attached to someone he barely knew? Dear Warner, I'm off in search of memories. I've intruded on your family's holiday long enough. I'm eternally grateful for the hospitality you've shown me. Star. He reread the note and even turned it over as if looking for more. Her written words made no promise to return to him. But of course she couldn't make that promise without knowing what type of environment she would enter to when her memories reappeared. Guilt gnawed at the frayed edges of his emotions. The last thing he'd done with her was dance. Perhaps his actions drove her to leave without a personable goodbye. Now he'd have to tell Lizzie that Star had left. He'd been dreading the inevitable moment ever since his daughter had bounded down the stairs, claiming Star was her Christmas wish come true. Chapter 8. Star snapped out of her daydream when a red truck driving too fast almost clipped her with the side view mirror. It never slowed, as though the driver and occupant hadn't registered a pedestrian walking on the side of the road, made narrow by the piled snow lining the edges. At her current pace, she estimated she'd walked a few miles from the Orion's rented cabin. So far, no return of her memories and no abandoned vehicle. If she found her car or truck, she would surely find her ID. A few minutes later, the next truck to approach drove more slowly and pulled to a stop beside her. When the driver rolled down the window, he leaned over the passenger seat and smiled. He had a round face, thinning gray hair, and warm eyes encased in crow's feet.
You all right, miss? Can I give you a ride somewhere?
In the few seconds he took to pull over, roll down the window, and ask his questions, Star's mind assessed for threats. She glimpsed the back of his truck: rope, shears, tarp, and some lawn equipment. She sensed he was genuine and posed no danger, but knew exactly what she'd do to defend herself if he displayed dark intentions. Was sizing up another person and whether she could physically best them part of normal human behavior or part of her shady past? Past or present? I actually lost my car somewhere off the road. I'm going to keep walking until I find it.
I don't mind driving you up and down for a bit. I'd feel better trying to help than leave you on the side of a narrow road in the cold. Or I can call someone for you.
Bandit whined. I'll take that ride. She opened the door and climbed into the passenger seat. Warm air thawed her cold cheeks. Thanks. He began slowly driving as she looked out the window. The news reported on the radio. Authorities report escaped convicts Willie and Alvin Green have been spotted in Patrick County. Although dubbed the Grinch brothers for their holiday escape, police warn that the criminals are to be considered armed and dangerous. The man turned off the radio.
I've been listening to this for the last several days. I guess it's part of the reason I didn't want you walking the road alone.
I appreciate the assistance. Bandit stuck his head out through her coat.
Well, that's a cute fella.
This is Bandit.
I had an old hound used to follow me everywhere. Name was Pershing.
Pershing? The World War I Army general?
I served in the Army.
Army? I was a Special Operations Communications Sergeant. A throbbing started in her left temple as memories flooded her mind. She'd been in the division that worked with communication gear and a range of specialized equipment, from encrypted satellite communications down to old-style Morse key systems.
Are you okay?
Yes. She took a breath to clear her thoughts and lifted a business card from the center console of the truck. Is this you? Pole Davis, Tree Service.
Pole Davis, at your service.
Stella Maddox. The name flowed naturally off her tongue. She instantly remembered her Army nickname, Mad Eye.
Still in the Army, Stella?
No, I did 6 years. I now train civilians on survival techniques, including staged kidnapping and hostage events, she remembered. Oh, there! She spotted the top of her blue car. He pulled over, turning on his hazard lights. With the dog still in her coat, she got out of the car and looked over the embankment. Pole walked around and stood beside her. He pulled on an Army baseball cap.
I've got a winch, but you're gonna need quite the tow truck to pull you out.
He withdrew his phone.
Need me to call?
Yes, thank you. She was grateful for his hospitality and that he'd managed to trigger her memories, unbeknownst to him. She carefully picked her way down to the car, wanting to find her phone. It wouldn't have any charge left and might not work altogether after 3 days in the snow, but it was still like an appendage. Now that talking to Pole had returned her memories, other flashes of her past were coming in rapid fire. After the Army, she'd earned a master's in education. She had tried teaching for a few years, but wanted something unconventional, so she took a job with TSTS, Tactical Survival Training Specialists. She trained civilians in survival, especially with simulated events. The kidnapping and hostage trainees were usually people planning mission trips or job relocations into hostile territory and wanting to be prepared for worst-case scenarios. She and her team carried unloaded props for the training. The only complaint they ever received from civilians was for not being harsh enough during the simulations. Reaching her car, she felt giddy and free with the knowledge she wasn't the monster her nightmare had suggested. Those had been memories viewed out of context. When she looked at the gnarled front of her car, pain shot through her forehead, momentarily blinding her as she remembered the car crash. A red truck had run her off the road. She recalled getting out of her car and taking the tumble. As she eased down the slope, she pictured the trajectory of her fall and where her phone might have gone. She let Bandit out into the snow as she dug.
Are you okay?
Pole called down from the road. Yes, just looking for my phone. Like a needle in a haystack, she thought. A bright patch of snow caught her eye. Unnaturally bright. She looked up to the sky, but the light couldn't be explained by sun or reflection. She clawed at the illuminated spot of snow. 3 inches down, she found her phone. Huh. The case still contained her license and credit card. She stuck it in her coat pocket with plans to charge the device later. Standing and brushing snow off her knees, She thought of Warner and his family's Christmas star. The star had shown her the way through the Christmas storm, a guiding light through cold and snow and darkness. Then the red truck returned to the forefront of her mind. The red truck had hogged the road that night as it headed up the mountain, forcing her off of the edge. It had been the same red truck coming down the mountain today. 2 men had been visible through the windshield. Words replayed in her mind. 2 escaped convicts. Red Chevy, Colorado. Grinch Brothers. Spotted in Patrick County. They had gone up the mountain and probably had to stop somewhere that night due to the weather. Now with the roads clear, they were coming back down in the middle of an active manhunt for them. If they were listening to the radio or checking the news online, they would know they needed a new vehicle. Stella sucked in a breath. Lizzie! Warner! The star hovering above the snow-covered ground shone brighter. She thought of the red truck going fast down the mountain only 30 minutes ago. What were the odds of the Grinch brothers stopping at the Orion's cabin? But the news said authorities were closing in on them. If they were desperate for money or a new vehicle and saw the cabin lights from the road, it could lure them to the Orions. The family lit a fire every day, and smoke from the chimney would indicate it had warmth, food, and occupants who may have items of value to 2 men on the run, including a new vehicle. The driveway curved, which would make a good hiding place for a bright red truck. Are they in trouble? Stella asked the light, the Christmas spirit. Blinking rapidly, the star shot up from the snow to 8 feet off the ground. She jolted at the flashing Morse code the start was emitting. Yes, it had answered. Worry and fear for Warner and his family spiked her heart rate and sent blood rushing through her ears. Show me the way! The star darted off through the trees. She scooped up Bandit and dashed through the snow, barely registering Pull calling to her. I'll be back, she called to him, uncertain if he could hear her from the distance. Warner stared at the fire, watching the flames dance rhythmically to an unheard beat. Lizzie had taken the news of Star's departure hard. She blamed him for not believing the woman had been a gift, as if his negativity had driven her away. His daughter sulked alone in her room, angry with him. His parents came to the sofa and sat on either side of him. Some Christmas star, he complained. What gift is given so briefly and taken so abruptly? He understood she had to leave and wasn't angry at the woman, only frustrated with the circumstances. He scrubbed his hands over his face as he leaned forward where he sat. I liked her. A lot. More than I should have for someone engaged. More than what is rational for such a brief acquaintance. His mom rubbed a hand along his back. Maybe the gift wasn't the woman herself, but the hope she brought. Hope? Warner, since Tina's death, you've been thinking you don't have it in you to form a romantic relationship. Now you know you can care for another woman. He tried to let the wisdom of his mother's words sink in, but he still felt simultaneously hollow and critical of himself for having no justifiable cause to be so affected by Star's departure. Star is a good person, his father added. She'll come back for a proper goodbye. I'm not sure goodbye will be any easier the second time around. The front door burst open, and cold air flooded the cabin. Warner jumped to his feet and stopped at the sight of 2 hideous, snarling men in the doorway. He recognized the escaped convicts and instantly felt the danger they carried with them. With his heart thumping its way into his throat, he swallowed and took a protective stance in front of his parents. Lizzie had gone to her room earlier. Would she stay up there and remain hidden until these criminals left? He'd give them whatever valuables he had: money, clothes, and the car. And hopefully that would be enough. When Stella reached the Orion's rented cabin, acid threatened to burn a hole in her chest at the sight of a red truck parked off to one side, out of view of the road. She circled the cabin, stealing glimpses of the inhabitants through the windows as she also caught her breath from the brisk hike here. Through a thin space between the curtains, she could see the family huddled on the couch. Safety existed in clustering the hostages, but it also gave the aggressors the advantage of keeping their victims contained. Warner had a streak of blood down his temple that originated from a gash at his hairline. She wondered if he tried to resist or if the attackers struck a blow as a demonstration that they weren't opposed to the use of force. Grinch Brother Number 1 paced in front of the family on the couch, holding a poker stick. He had dark hair framing a pockmarked face. He wore jeans and a grease-stained shirt. At least, she hoped it was grease and not something belonging to his last victim. Grinch Brother Number 2 was rummaging through the main-level bedroom, the one Louise and Ralph had been staying in. She didn't see Lizzie, though she couldn't see into the upstairs rooms, only that the lights were on. Stella weighed her options. She could monitor the situation. There was a chance the men would steal what they wanted and leave. Alternatively, she could take the offensive and have the advantage of a surprise attack. If she idly waited to see what two desperate men on the run from police, known to incorporate violence into their thievery, might do, one or more of the Orions could be hurt before Stella intervened. Yet, if she attempted a rescue, she could cause an escalation in violence. "Do they have guns?" she asked the Christmas star in barely a whisper. No. That was a relief. The star dove along the slope of the mountain and around the back of the cabin. Well, she followed it this far. She might as well continue to trust the Orion Christmas spirit. She climbed down the side and around to under the porch where the firewood was stored. A small ball in a purple coat sat on the ground. "Lizzie? Star!" She leapt up and into Stella's arms. "Shh, are you okay?" She hugged the girl and stroked her blonde hair. "Daddy said you were gone." "I was gone, but your family's Christmas star let me know I needed to come back. Can you see it?" Lizzie wiped away tears and nodded as Stella set her down. "Why are you outside in the cold?" She adjusted the girl's hat over her ears. "I came outside to look for you. When I didn't find you, I stayed here and cried. Then I heard shouting." "Does your dad know where you are?" She shook her head with eyes downcast. She probably understood her father would be frantic if he discovered her missing. "Lizzie, I have an important task for you. Are you up for it?" She nodded. Stella pulled Bandit out of her coat. "Can you look after my dog for me? Stay here with the star until I or your dad comes back for you, okay?" She pulled out the food from her coat and set it on the wood pile. Lizzie gathered the puppy in her arms and nodded. "You're not leaving?" Stella pressed a gloved hand to the girl's cheek and gave her a tender smile. "I'm not leaving." Chapter 9. Warner watched their captors with clenched teeth. He didn't even register pain from the injury on his head. He registered anger. But he feared for his family, and any action he took could endanger them. "Hurry up, Alvin!" the man with the crowbar shouted. Warner couldn't take on a hardened escaped convict, much less one with a solid carbon steel crowbar for a weapon. When he told the pair of them to take whatever they wanted and leave, They replied with a blow to his head. He ducked just enough to take more of a glancing blow than a direct hit. Better him than his parents, he thought. His father took blood thinners for an irregular heartbeat. Even a graze could be an emergency for him. Warner listened to the sound of rummaging through the room. The one Grinch brother would be done with the main floor bedrooms and probably advance upstairs soon. Upstairs to Lizzie. She'd stayed hidden thus far. Maybe she would continue to do so.
Is there a safe or something with valuables?
The one with the crowbar demanded.
I don't know. We're renters,
Warner answered, trying to keep his voice calm.
Take anything you want. The car keys are on the counter,
he repeated. On the counter, beside his phone, he realized. But the Grinch brothers could rob them and be gone before police arrived, even if he had access to his phone. If Warner was lucky, they'd take valuables and go. He racked his brain for all the bits of news he'd heard. Theft and violence. No reports had ever mentioned homicide. The thieves were making no effort to hide their identity from him and his parents, but that didn't mean they intended further harm. They were already wanted for escaping from prison. What was one more robbery charge in the mix? Perhaps this was wishful thinking on Warner's part. The other brother emerged, hauling a suitcase in one hand and a knife he'd swiped from the kitchen in the other.
Mostly crap, but I grabbed a few things. Check upstairs.
Warner clenched his fists. If his family's Christmas spirit planned to grant them a miracle this year, now was the time. Alvin bounded up to the second floor as his watchful brother with the crowbar continued to pace. He stopped abruptly, a slow, wicked smile curling his lips to reveal crooked, mostly metal teeth. His gaze flickered from the toy purple unicorn by the tree to the children's books to the Play-Doh near the fireplace. His diabolic eyes slid toward Warner.
Where's the little girl? Over my dead body,
Warner thought, as every muscle in his body tensed for a fight. Before violence could erupt, smoke poured out of the fireplace and filled the room. Warner turned and took his parents down to the floor to escape the fumes. Stella snatched the shovel beside the woodpile and scurried back up the embankment toward the front of the house. She tucked the shovel into the back of her jacket with the handle sticking up before climbing the railing connected to one side of the house where the porch started.
Hurry up, Alvin!
One of the men barked. Fortunately, most of the railing was clear of snow and wouldn't be too slippery. After steadying herself, she took to the count of 3 before jumping and grasping the edge of the roof. She reached elbow high, and the snow kept her from making too much noise. She threw a leg up onto the roof, knocking snow to the ground. Although she did daily push-ups and planks, she had to use every ounce of upper body strength to pull herself onto the base of the eave. She swung one leg up. Her muscles shook and burned from the effort. Once she had a leg and arm up, she was able to get the rest of her body on the roof, and she cleared the spot from snow. Catching her breath, she slowly stood, careful to keep her balance. The section of the roof where she had stood had a gentle slope, but soon became steeper as it peaked above the second-floor bedrooms. The snow would make the climb hazardous. After venturing a few steps, she took out the shovel and tugged off her coat. She'd be cold again later, but for now, with the vigorous activity, she wouldn't miss it. She balanced the coat on the metal tip of the spade-shaped shovel and then stretched her arms and torso as far as she could and draped the jacket over the chimney crown, preventing the venting of smoke. After tossing the shovel a ways off the roof, she let herself slide down the surface facing the front yard. When she reached the edge, she flung herself toward one of the piles of snow Warner had banked while shoveling the driveway the other day. She had only seconds to hope this wasn't a bad idea when the side of her curled body hit the packed snow. The impact jarred her body, and now she was half covered in snow with no coat, but it had still been the fastest way down. If she had tried to land feet first anywhere, the slippery surfaces could have proven hazardous. Gritting her teeth through the discomfort, she rolled and pushed to her feet. She scrambled to the front door, where she crouched to one side and readied her shovel for her attack. Panicked shouting emitted from inside the house. Warner kept one arm over each of his parents as he held them unmoving on the ground near the couch. He needed to get them out of the house, but also needed to get Lizzie to safety. Smoke poured out of the fireplace and rose to the ceiling, but soon the whole cabin would fill with deadly particles. "What the?" The man with the crowbar swatted uselessly at the thickening smoke. "Is something on fire?" the other brother called down from the third floor. "Alvin, let's get out of here!" He snatched the keys off the counter. "I'm not finished, Willie!" Alvin called out. "Now!" He coughed and gagged. "I'll be in the car!" Willie headed for the front door. As he stepped outside, a thunk was followed by a grunt and a second thwack. Star walked into the living room, leaving the front door open to vent the cabin. Her hair was a disheveled heap, and she was without her coat, with snow clinging to her sweater. She looked like some type of frost warrior. Was she wielding a shovel? Behind her, Willie's feet were visible on the ground in a way suggesting he was face down. Smoke rolled out the open door, helping to clear the room. She pressed a finger to her lips. Warner nodded. Quiet. He didn't have a problem keeping silent so long as they got Lizzie out of the smoke-infested upper level. But he hadn't called to her yet with the other criminals still up there. "Where is he?" Star mouthed. Warner pointed upstairs. She crept silently past him, as eerily calm as a lion stalking a gazelle. He recalled how she'd flipped the kitchen knife so casually in her hand while chopping onions, and how she dodged snowballs seemingly effortlessly. Who was she? As she passed him, she handed off the crowbar she'd apparently swiped from Willie while he was busy being unconscious. She pointed her fingers from her eyes to the brother by the door. Warner understood. He was to watch Willie in case he tried to move. He whispered to his parents, "Stay down." Star positioned herself behind the stairs. "Willie!" Alvin called, emerging from a room to lean over the railing. "Hey, what'd you do to Willie?" he shouted at Warner. He guessed from Alvin's perspective, it looked like he'd been the one to take out his brother. Alvin started downstairs, wielding the kitchen knife he grabbed earlier. The glint of metal looked as menacing as the snarl on his face. Halfway down, Star thrust a hand through the stairs, catching Alvin by the ankle and sending him head first the rest of the way down. The knife and bag he was carrying flew forward. In a quick motion, Star came around the stairs and struck Alvin with the flat end of the shovel. He crumpled to the floor. "Lizzie!" Warner shouted toward the stairs, wanting to run upstairs, but not wanting to leave Star with two dangerous men, even though they were injured on the floor. "She's safe," Star said, "outside by the woodpile." "How did you... Who are you?" Warner stared at her. "Your memories?" She smiled. "They all returned. My name is Stella Maddox." "You came back." "Your Christmas star alerted me that you were in danger." He wanted to reach for her, but they stood at opposite ends of the room, each guarding one brother. Ralph came to stand by his side. "I'll watch him. You go check on Lizzie." He took the crowbar from his hand. I need to borrow someone's phone, Stella said. Louise stood and walked to Stella, wrapping her arms around her. Stella, our Christmas star! Warner slipped on his boots and dashed outside. Lizzie! Stella used Louise's phone to call the police while plugging her own into one of their chargers. She told them their location and about the incident with the Grinch brothers. She also requested a fire truck since perhaps they could clear the smoke-infested cabin to make it habitable for the Orions tonight. Next, she dialed Pole's number from his business card she'd swiped. It's Stella. I'm sorry for rushing out on you.
Everything okay? The tow truck company's arrived and set to work.
You remember those Grinch brothers?
Yeah?
They attacked the family I stayed with over Christmas. Everyone is okay, and the convicts are incapacitated for now. Would you be interested in bringing that rope from your truck bed in exchange for the reward money? I'd like to have them better restrained before the police arrive. They've been notified.
You incapacitated them?
She rolled her aching shoulder muscles. Yeah, well, Army strong. Pole chuckled.
I don't need a reward. I need to see your work firsthand.
She gave him the cabin address, and he gave her the name and number of the tow truck company so she'd know how to track down her car after it was pulled off the tree. While she'd been on the phone, Ralph found duct tape in the kitchen. He and Warner used the adhesive to bind the criminals' hands together. Louise kept Lizzie outside, presumably so she wouldn't see the scary men cursing on the floor. Together, Louise and her granddaughter played in the snow with Bandit away from the house. Stella climbed the roof again and retrieved her coat. With the adrenaline ebbing, she was getting cold in only her sweater. She was easing herself down from the eave when she felt hands on her waist.
I'll help you the rest of the way,
Warner said. When her feet were planted firmly on the ground, Warner's hands still rested on her hips. She stepped forward and gave him the kiss she'd been holding back for the past few days. Their lips met in a sweet, soft caress. The electricity between them practically sparked, but the kiss was much too brief as Warner pulled away.
But you're engaged.
Warner's eyes flared with a mix of pain and anger, but he didn't let go of her. Stella laughed and looked down at the piece of jewelry. The reason I'm wearing a too large diamond on a too tight ring is that I tried on my mother's engagement ring. I didn't have time to lubricate and work it off before the car accident.
You're not engaged?
Her lips quirked. I'm not engaged. A smile spread across his face as his eyes sparkled. He tugged her to him and wrapped her in a fierce hug. When he leaned in for another kiss, Stella returned the hug and surrendered her heart to the moment. Around them, plump, soft snow drifted down from the afternoon sky. Chapter 10. The next morning, Stella arranged to host lunch with the Orions at her parents' house. Bandit kept at her heels, sensing her excitement. Yesterday, after the police carted away the Grinch brothers and she'd thanked Pole again, she'd been exhausted. She exchanged numbers with Warner, and Pole gave her a ride home. Deciding to check on her car tomorrow, she'd showered and went to bed. The next morning, she texted Warner to invite them for lunch. When Warner texted to ask what they could bring, she replied with eggnog. For their group lunch, she cooked chicken cordon bleu with a side of green beans. Since the snickerdoodle cookies had been preserved and uneaten during her absence, they would be for dessert. She wanted to show the family her gratitude and how special they'd made her feel during their holiday. She'd bonded with all of them after only a few short days. By the time the doorbell rang, she had festive placemats with poinsettias on the table and a centerpiece of holly glowing with red LED lights. When she opened the door, they all greeted her: Lizzie, Louise, Ralph, and Warner. Ralph held a bottle of wine, and Louise had a round dish Stella suspected was a pie. Come in, come in. I'm so glad you came. Lizzie bolted across the threshold to Stella and gave a brief hug before kneeling to play with Bandit. She took her shoes off at the door before following the boisterous puppy into the living room. We'll put these in the kitchen. Louise and Ralph walked past her, also leaving their shoes by the door. Stella locked eyes with Warner as her heart skittered a few beats. He stepped inside and closed the door. Hi. She tucked her hands into the pockets of her blue jeans, bunching the bottom hem of her pale green sweater. Hello. I'm Stella Maddox. I'm 32. I teach survival training to corporate employees and medical missionaries going overseas or south of the border. I proudly served in the Army for 6 years. I had a meniscal tear my 4th year in, but continued to work in communications. After the Army, I earned my master's degree in education. I have one brother, and my parents own this house. They're currently traveling on vacation. Warner smiled broadly, took a step closer, and glanced above her. I'm Warner Orion, and you already know about me and my family. I want to learn all about you, Stella. But first, I'm going to back you up 3 paces and kiss you senseless under the mistletoe. Her heart turned light as a feather. I might have intentionally placed that there this morning, in hopes you might. Her words came out slightly breathless. He wrapped his arms around her and held nothing back. The kiss was deep and sensual, and everything she imagined it would be. She melted into the bliss of passion. When at last they broke away, he asked, Do you have plans for New Year's? He kept his arms around her. No, but I'm open to crashing yours. He chuckled. You're welcome to crash any of my holidays. Besides, he looked toward his family gathering at the table. I don't think you crashed Christmas. I think you saved it. You saved me. If you hadn't had a family star spirit working miracles, I never would have made it safely to your cabin. Since we've established that we rescued each other, I'm going to savor this moment a little longer. He leaned in for another kiss. 12 months later, Warner and Stella sat on the sofa in front of the cabin fire. Lizzie was in bed for the night after a day of sledding and snowball fights. She had taken some time to wind down, given her anticipation of Santa coming tonight. Bandit slept at the foot of her bed. Warner had rented the same cabin from a year ago, the same cabin where Star had shown up on his sofa. He'd brought gifts for Lizzie to open in the morning, though none of them would top the woman and puppy who'd arrived into their lives a year ago. He and Stella had taken time since last Christmas to date and get to know each other better. Stella traveled frequently with her job, but she'd been able to spend a lot of time with him and Lizzie in between. They hiked, skied, zip-lined, camped outdoors, and camped in their own homes. He would never take his second chance at love for granted. In front of the crackling cabin fire, he turned toward Stella. 1 year ago tonight, you found your way to my cabin. Warner was still astounded when he considered the miracle of the family's Christmas spirit leading Stella to them. And my heart, he added, looking into those starlit blue eyes. And you came back when you didn't have to. You'll forever be the amazing woman I love. He withdrew a small box from his pocket as he slipped down onto one knee. He could have asked her to marry him after the first time they'd kissed, And not just because she saved his family from a terrible fate. He'd fallen in love with her within days, but rational behavior prevailed, and he'd given her time to know him and his daughter better. He opened the box to reveal a diamond ring. "Marry me, Stella. My family's star may have brought you to me, but you're the star that holds my heart." She smiled with eyes glistening like tinsel on a tree. "Yes, of course, yes." As he slipped the ring on her finger, chest bursting with joy, she pulled him to her for a long, slow kiss. The end.